In the wild, open country along the border of Idaho and Wyoming, a pair of steel rails follow an old wagon road once traveled by pioneers. It is a land of sage-covered hills, oil and gas wells, coal mines, and ghost towns. It is a land traversed by high-horsepower diesels, and once in a while, a steam giant. This is Union Pacific's Pocatello Subdivision. With rails first laid by the Oregon Short Line between 1881 and 1882, the Pocatello Subdivision connects its namesake town and rail yard in Idaho with UP's busy Overland route 214 miles away at Granger, Wyoming. Part of the greater Oregon Short Line route that connects to the Pacific Northwest at Huntington, Oregon, the Pocatello Subdivision serves agriculture and mining industries in the region. It also provides a connection between the shipping ports of Portland and Seattle with UP's major rail hub in North Platte, Nebraska. In part one of this two-part series, we looked at the west end of the subdivision between Pocatello and the former division point of Montpelier, Idaho. Now, let's continue our eastward journey to meet the original Transcontinental Railroad at Granger, Wyoming. Heavy manifests work between Pocatello and North Platte. Unit grain and soda ash trains head to and from the Pacific Northwest. Long lumbering double stack and high priority intermodal trains blast over mountain passes. Join us in a land where the deer and the antelope still play. Union Pacific's Pocatello Subdivision, Part 2. The Oregon Short Line originally built west of this junction at Granger, Wyoming in 1881. Its goal was to meet and stop the advancement of the competing Oregon Railway and Navigation Company, which was in the process of taming the three summits of Oregon's Blue Mountains. The two railroads met at Huntington, Oregon in late 1884, creating a direct link between the Overland route and the inland port on the Columbia River known as Portland. Part of Union Pacific's Portland area timetable, the Pocatello Sub officially begins at Pocatello Yard, milepost 214.2. Mileposts will count down as we head east for Granger. Today's journey begins at Montpelier, milepost 114.8. This was once a division point and crew change point on the OSL. Starting in 1972, crews began running the entire line from Pocatello. Leaving Montpelier, the railroad continues as a double-track main line through the Bear Lake Valley to Dingle, where single track begins. From there, it winds through the mountains following the Bear River to the siding of Harer, past the former station of Pegram, and on to the siding of Chausse. Just east of the East Switch, trains enter the state of Wyoming. Continuing to follow the Bear River, trains pass Mars and arrive at Cokeville, near the bottom of the Sublette mountain range. The line continues in a southern compass heading through Pixley and Beckwith. After passing through Leefe, the railroad leaves the Bear River for an eastern course through the Nugget Canyon toward Fossil Butte. Trains pass the old ghost town of Sage at the entrance of the canyon. Then tackle a 1% grade past the sidings of Nugget and Fossil. The grade tops out at an elevation of 7,053 feet above sea level inside a massive cut which bypassed a tunnel during a 1956 line relocation project. Just east of the cut is Moyer Junction, where the Cumberland branch heads south for 10.9 miles, serving area mines. Just east of the junction are the historic towns of Kemmerer and Diamondville along the Hams Fork River. This watercourse will guide the railroad for the remainder of the way to Granger, including the sidings of Waterfall, Opal, Nutria, and Moxa. Our starting point was known as Clover Creek when it was first settled in 1864 by pioneers traveling the Oregon Trail. Like many western towns, it went by different names in its youth. The name Clover Creek was changed to Belmont by the time Mormon leader Brigham Young came to the scene. He decided to rename it for the capital of the state where he was born, Montpelier, Vermont. The Oregon Short Line arrived on August 5, 1882, building west from the UP Transcontinental Main Line at Granger, Wyoming. The OSL would reach Huntington, Oregon by 1884. In August of 1896, the Bank of Montpelier was the scene of a robbery by famous Western outlaw Butch Cassidy and members of his Wild Bunch. They made off with $7,000. That bank today is the Butch Cassidy Museum. It has the distinction of being the only bank robbed by Cassidy that continues to stand today. In July of 2024, Montpelier found itself hosting a sleeping giant as Big Boy 4014 spent the night at the former Oregon Short Line terminal on its return trip to Cheyenne during a West Coast tour to California. While the engine continues to slumber in the early morning hours, we catch our first train of the day. UP 6230 is westbound for Pocatello as it ducks under the signal bridge at control point CPG 115. Around 9 a.m. local time, the UP steam crew gets permission from the dispatcher in Omaha to enter the main line at Montpelier and continue east. The 1.2 million pound engine eases through the yard with care. UP Heritage Unit number 1983 adds additional power and, more importantly, dynamic braking for the train. Although some rail fans have criticized the use of a diesel on a steam engine like this, we have to remember that the 4014 is a large and unnecessary expenditure for the railroad, and spare parts cannot simply be purchased off the shelves when something breaks. A little TLC by the steam crew is appropriate for this 84-year-old engine. The Pocatello Subdivision departs Montpelier on a south-southeast heading through the Bear Lake Valley, east of the Wasatch Range. The main line is double-tracked for the first 7 miles to a railroad station named Dingle. A mixed manifest heads east behind UP 8526. The train enters single track at Dingle, control point CPG 108. The main line will continue east to Granger as a single track with sidings, although there are many sections where the sidings have been lengthened. With a name like Dingle, we just had to say we'd been there. It is an unincorporated community and a Mormon settlement dating back to 1871. Before that, a colorful fur trapper, blacksmith, and horse thief named Pegleg Smith established a trading post near here in 1848. A mountain man, Thomas Long Smith, had to amputate his own leg after being shot in the knee by an Indian. It didn't seem to slow him down much. It is said that Pegleg made a fortune selling horses to the miners during the California Gold Rush. In a time when $30 per month was considered good pay, Pegleg reportedly brought in $100 per day. With our attention back to the railroad, UP 2521 takes a westbound soda ash train on to Main 2 at Dingle. Soda ash trains originate near Green River, Wyoming, and are bound for Portland, Oregon. The Bear River leads the railroad through the mountains of southeast Idaho near the Wyoming border. We are near a location on the Oregon Trail referred to as Big Hill by pioneers. It was said to be one of the steepest climbs west of the United States at the time. Another section of the trail jogged to the south, making a longer but somewhat easier course. Surveyors for the Oregon Short Line apparently agreed with that assessment because that's where we find the railroad. UP 5701 leads a manifest east through this frozen scene at Harer. Just east of the siding of Harer, we find milepost 100, giving us a good idea of just how far it is between here and our destination of Granger. The little-used Pegram Road crosses the main line, guarded by flashing lights and crossbucks. They are activated by a local out of Kemmerer, which is returning light from Montpelier. The Bear River and the railroad make a giant horseshoe bend around the base of the Sheep Creek Hills and into the Horse Valley. An empty 160-car soda ash train heads east for the Wyoming border. Well, as the sign says, welcome to Pegram. This town was established along with the coming of the Oregon Short Line. Originally called Leefe, the town began with a water tank and railroad depot, which doubled as a school, church, dance hall, or whatever was needed. You could say that Pegram is off the beaten path as Route 30, the old Lincoln Highway, chooses to cross the Sheep Creek Hills to the north. This is farming and ranching country, and those who live and work here have done so for generations. The only sound that breaks the silence is that of passing trains, like this high-priority Z that is bound for points east, behind UP 9020. 7 engines power this extra-long train in a 4x2x1 configuration. The train is a mixture of autoracks, marine and domestic stacks, and UPS trailers. Making our way through the valley, the railroad continues east toward the Wyoming state line, passing milepost 95 at Chausse. According to the old timetable we were using from 2011, Chausse sighting had a length of 7,339 feet. However, after arriving on location, we soon discovered it had been lengthened by about a mile. It's around 12,619 feet today. In this shot, the microwave antennas in the distance marked the former east switch at milepost 93.8. We were going to set up there, but an unhappy skunk talked us out of it. Not that we wanted to give him a chance to communicate his disapproval of our being there. The approaching train is eastbound, consisting mostly of evergreen containers with UP 7142 and 8656 for power. The stack train disappears around a curve as it nears the new east switch of Chausse. What you are looking at is the state line. The left side of Border Road is Idaho, and Wyoming is on the right, as we are looking north. The Pegram Road continues to follow the main line, but it ends in less than a mile where the UP makes a crossing of the Bear River. Looking back into Idaho, we see the new east switch of Chausse near milepost 92.8. The control point is CPG 093, and the high green is for the UP 8160, which is westbound for Montpelier. This is the same local out of Kemmerer that we saw earlier, just out of sequence. The first Wyoming town we encounter is Cokeville, near milepost 83. Named for coal found in the area, the town started as a trading post and grew from the coming of the railroad in 1882. Sheep ranching was big in the early 20th century, and Cokeville for a while was called the sheep capital of the world. Big Boy 4014 departs Cokeville after making a quick stop. For the past couple of decades, we have been familiar with Union Pacific's Building America slogan. This old reefer car sports an older moniker from the 1940s and 50s as a stack train races west toward Cokeville. The Bear River continues to lead the railroad in a southern compass heading through Beckwith and toward the siding of Leefe. Milepost 68 puts us near the west switch of the 18,600-foot siding. UP 6728 is westbound with a manifest, which has just met an eastbound at Leefe. It rounds a curve in dynamics near the west switch, which is control point CPG 066. Since leaving Montpelier, the grade has been fairly level thanks to the course of the Bear River. At Beckwith, eastbound trains will begin to pull away from the river on a grade that will crest in the mountains to the east, near Fossil. An old Y track appears in the sagebrush near milepost 65. This once served the Leefe mine, an open-pit phosphorus mine which was active between 1908 and 1978. The rails have long been pulled up and the land reclaimed. UP 5987 brings an eastbound train of hoppers past the old Y track on a yellow block. It'll be pausing here at Leefe for one westbound. The westbound in question is a wind turbine train, led by UP 5760. A CSX GEVO number 5352 is getting a tour of Wyoming today. Taking a more easterly course, the railroad passes the old ghost town of Sage below Boulder Ridge, near the mouth of Nugget Canyon. This was reportedly a stop on the Overland stage line running north from Fort Bridger. It later became a railroad town on the Oregon Short Line. Some residents worked in a nearby coal mine, although supposedly that never panned out. Sage served as a helper base to assist eastbound trains over the hill to Kemmerer, and it had a post office that operated between 1900 and 1973. Of the many small towns that were platted across the American West, some grew into thriving cities. Some hung on and found a way to survive, and others, like Sage, withered and died along with the dreams of those who once called this place home. Left to the elements and vandals, the ghost town is now making a slow dissolve back into the Wyoming prairie. The old helper pocket now sees occasional use by maintenance of way equipment. The Kemmerer local passes the old helper base on its way to Montpelier with a short train. The railroad continues up a narrow canyon above Sage that weaves into the mountains below Fossil Butte. Nugget Canyon, as it is called, is occupied by Twin Creek and U.S. Highway 30. UP 9825 is in dynamics as it brings a loaded grain train down the 1% grade between the sidings of Ore and Nugget. Like the two westbounds before it, the 9825 also met the UP 5987 at Leefe, and now the empty grain train is again on the move, climbing the grade toward Fossil. Visiting Nugget Canyon during a summer rain shower, we set up at milepost 56 for an eastbound manifest led by UP 7283. We are standing near the former town site of Fossil, an old ghost town and station on the Oregon Short Line where steam engines were serviced. The current main line was moved north of town during a line relocation project in 1956. On a cold and windy January afternoon, we again see the UP 5701 leading a manifest train east between the current sidings of Nugget and Fossil. The grade is still 1% as the diesels climb past the Fossil Butte National Monument in the mountains above the grade. Named for the large number of fish fossils found in the region, Fossil served the Oregon Short Line during the steam era. Besides the engine shops, the town had a boarding house, hotel, restaurant, saloon, post office, school, and general store. Today, the only surviving structure is the Fossil Depot, still located along the old main line where it was abandoned in the 1950s. The original town of Fossil was located farther to the east, but westbound trains often overshot the depot, which was fairly close to the bottom of the heavy grade from Kemmerer. In 1901, the railroad moved the town a mile to the west to alleviate the problem. Fossil faded at the end of the steam era, and the new alignment further reduced the heavy grade to a more manageable 1%. The old town of Fossil was down in the valley behind this stack train as it slithers up the newer 1956 alignment to the current siding of the same name. Today's practice of running long, heavy trains with minimal power means a slow grind to the top for this crew of the 7521 East. The 7521 is the only engine powering the slow-moving stacker. Making matters worse, another eastbound ahead is having to stop and inspect their train after receiving an integrity failure message from a detector. The 7521 blows for a grade crossing as it passes the west switch of the siding of Fossil, control point CPG 048. The siding is 7,331 feet in length. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 brought thousands of fortune seekers through this country, following the Oregon Trail. Many travelers by wagon train took the Sublette Cutoff, located about 3 miles north of here. It was a shorter route to the Bear River that led through the Little Colorado Desert. Although shorter, it was also more challenging than the main route, and many who took the Sublette Cutoff never made it to California. Water was scarce. Some died of illness or injury and were buried along the trail. Winter claimed others when they were caught in blizzards and froze to death, their dreams dying with them. The coming of the rails changed all of that forever. It made the West more accessible for anyone who wanted it. A land once saved only for those with determination and true grit soon became stations and mileposts on a railroad timetable. In contrast to the eastbound stack train, UP 7647 is making good time as it glides down the hill at Fossil. Another eastbound climbs the hill at Fossil, this time UP 7807 with a manifest train out of Pocatello. The crew of this train is nearing the end of their legal 12 hours of service. The plan is to tie it down at Kemmerer until a fresh crew can take it the rest of the way to Green River, another 70 miles to the east. An old barn stands in Hay Hollow, not far from the east switch of Fossil. This switch is in a cut, which is part of the 1956 realignment. UP 5987 is in charge of another empty grain train as it thunders up the grade. Milepost 44 puts us near the top of Tunnel Hill, as it was called by locals, just west of Moyer Junction. Big Boy 4014 enters a big cut near the remnants of the old tunnel. The old grade out of Fossil breached the mountain just south of the current cut, right here. We are looking at the east bore of the old tunnel, which was approximately 1,500 feet long. Code lines still run over the top of the old bore. Hiking into the tunnel cut, you can really appreciate its size. This eastbound Z train looks more like a Z-scale model by comparison as it blasts through the cut. A couple of remote-controlled DPUs are cut in mid-train. After exiting the tunnel cut, the train passes Moyer Junction and enters Kemmerer, where a westbound coal train is patiently waiting. This block signal shows red. Hopefully there is a high green on the opposite head for the coal train. Besides the railroad, the line relocation also benefited these swallows, which enjoy nesting in the lofty heights of the cut. Not bad real estate, if you don't mind those big noisy monsters that pass below. We must have a clear signal, because the westbound coal train is on the move. This train was loaded at the Kemmerer mine, located to the south of Moyer Junction on the Cumberland branch. The mine's biggest customer is the nearby Naughton power plant, which we will see in a moment. Coal is shipped by rail to other customers, but it's not a common occurrence these days. The train slowly grinds up the 0.94% grade to the apex located inside the tunnel cut. Here is a sign you don't see too often, unless you're in Wyoming. This is basically a "keep the gate closed" sign. It is a golden rule around cattle ranches, or if you find yourself in a state where the bovine population outnumbers that of people, which is the case right here in the Cowboy State. Moyer Junction is milepost 42.2 on the UP timetable. It is the connection with the 10.9-mile Cumberland Industrial Lead, which heads to the south. Just out of view is the Pacific Corp Naughton Power Plant. The 600-megawatt plant currently burns coal from the Kemmerer mine, along with natural gas. The mine and the plant are the backbone of the local economy, providing hundreds of jobs. However, the plant is slated to be closed in the coming years, and residents of both Kemmerer and Diamondville are worried that their communities will dry up and disappear just like Sage and Fossil. In 2024, Terra Power, owned by Bill Gates, announced the planning of a state-of-the-art nuclear plant which would be built adjacent to the current facility. So hopefully there is still a future for those who call this part of Wyoming home. The signals protecting Moyer Junction have gone hot, and soon we see why. UP 8160 has a train of empty coal hoppers for the Kemmerer mine, and the train slowly enters the Cumberland Industrial Lead. Currently, this junction has only an east leg, but we found evidence that at one time there was a west leg as well. A high green beckons an eastbound train into Kemmerer on a cloudy July morning. UP 8076 has just brought a stack train through the tunnel cut and now glides downgrade into town. As the 8076 passes, take a look at the front steps. This engine has apparently been in a fender bender recently. We honestly can't tell you how the other party fared. As the eastbound train of 40-foot marine containers disappears on the main, let's take a look at the historic towns of Kemmerer and Diamondville. It was explorer John C. Fremont who first discovered coal in the area in 1843. The first underground mine was opened by the Union Pacific in 1881 during the construction of the Oregon Short Line. Kemmerer was founded in 1897 by Irish immigrant Patrick Quealy, who was vice president of the Kemmerer Coal Company, located about 6 miles south of town. By 1950, Kemmerer was the world's largest open-pit coal mine, and the community thrived. Besides coal, an American institution was founded here in 1902. It began as a dry goods store, part of a chain called the Golden Rule Store. It was opened on April 14, 1902, and managed by James Cash Penney, who went on to form his own successful chain. The J.C. Penney Company was first incorporated in 1913, but this store in Kemmerer was the first. And it's still open for business today, just in case you happen to be in town and want to shop at the mother store. Directly adjacent to Kemmerer is the town of Diamondville, named for the plentiful black diamonds, a superior grade of coal found near the Hams Fork River by Harrison Church in 1868. Church built a cabin on a nearby hill, and with financial backing, formed the Hams Fork Coal Company in 1884. The town of Diamondville was incorporated in 1896. Besides mineral resources, this was, and is, good country for cattle and sheep. This flock have come to graze and drink from the Hams Fork, just across from the UP yard tracks. South of Diamondville are the ruins of another coal camp that was born, lived, and died here named Oakley. The Oakley mine closed in 1942. A pair of light engines are returning to Kemmerer after doing some work to the east at Opal. They passed the site of the old Oakley mine. A short time later, UP 6864 takes an eastbound manifest toward Green River. There are 8 engines on the point, most of which are dead in consist and are bound for North Platte, Nebraska. UP has a large engine service facility there, and it's quite possible that more power is needed in the east. The train ducks under Highway 30, following the course of the Hams Fork River, and so must we. UP 9020 takes a westbound Z past the siding of Waterfall. Waterfall is a 7,371-foot siding. The grade is about 0.5% for westbounds climbing toward Fossil. The Hams Fork River guides the railroad on the rest of the journey toward Granger. East of Waterfall Station, the grade snakes through a canyon surrounded by low sage-covered hills. A Norfolk Southern GE number 8042 is on the point of this eastbound. If you are familiar with our program on UP's Evanston subdivision called the Wasatch Grade, then this country may look familiar to you. If you draw a line due south from here, you would land at Carter, about 22 miles away as the crow flies. In the lowlands along the river, there is good grazing for horses, cattle, and sheep. Ranches thrive in the narrow valley below giant cliffs that serve as a maze through which the railroad must find its way. UP 8198 takes another unit soda ash drain westbound. At milepost 28.7, the railroad passes beneath Pale Cliffs near the crossing of Wagon Wheel Road. UP 7794 is eastbound with a stacked train running one by one. Rewinding the clock by 24 hours, Big Boy 4014 approaches the same crossing. The last town we will encounter is Opal, near milepost 24. The mercantile was established in 1892 when the railroad built through here. It quickly became the largest in western Wyoming, and company warehouses sprang up all over town. This became a major shipping point on the OSL for cattle and sheep, and today the railroad still does some business here. The original Opal mercantile burned in 1927, and the store was quickly rebuilt with a hotel on the top floor. A nearby monument was erected in 1913, dedicated to the early pioneers who passed this way. Something else that decorates the right-of-way are the code lines, which still stand along a good majority of the Oregon Short Line. Although they are going the way of the steam engine, caboose, semaphore, and searchlight, the old poles and code lines give us that sense of nostalgia for the way things used to be. UP 6041 is eastbound with marine containers. We again see the UP 9020 West with its train of domestic stacks and trailers and a few marine containers on the rear. Leaving Opal, there are two more sightings before the Pocatello Sub arrives at Granger: Nutria and Moxa. This small herd of antelope are near the sighting of Nutria, around milepost 16. At 12,015 feet in length, Nutria is one of the larger sightings on the Pocatello Sub, next to Chausse, which is over 12,000, then Bancroft at over 17, and finally Leefe, which is over 18,000 feet in length. UP 5537 leads another stack train east toward Granger. The railroad enters the Green River Basin, a region where numerous gas and oil wells are located. The siting of Nutria is in the Whiskey Butte field, which contains 5 oil wells and 328 gas wells, like the one you see here. On the Pocatello Subdivision timetable, Granger is milepost 846.8, which coincides with UP's Evanston Subdivision out of Green River. And just if you're wondering, milepost 0 would be in Council Bluffs, Iowa, just east of Omaha, Nebraska. It is June of 2016, and a westbound grain train led by UP 8418 and former SP 305, now patched the 6340, enter the Pocatello Subdivision. This signal bridge stands over the Evanston subdivision, while the Pocatello sub breaks away behind it. While a couple of antelope watch, an eastbound stack train prepares to enter the Evanston subdivision. A derailment at nearby Peru Hill has had traffic backed up for a couple of days. With the main finally open, trains are slowly beginning to move. These scenes were taken from our program, The Wasatch Grade, which covers the UP Overland route between Ogden, Utah and Green River. It is a very scenic route through Echo and Weber Canyons, and worth taking a look at. This is how Granger looks today. A newer set of signal bridges extend across all main tracks at the junction, sporting the new LED heads. UP 7401 leads a westbound grain train with a fresh crew out of Green River. A lone remote-controlled SD-70 Ace adds its muscle to the rear of the train. The grain train will soon meet an eastbound at Nutria, around 15 miles to the west. UP 5569 has a westbound stack train routed for Ogden on the Evanston Sub. The Evanston Subdivision is part of the original Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, known originally as the Pacific Railroad. The ceremonial driving of the Golden Spike happened at Promontory Summit, Utah on May 10, 1869, where the Central Pacific, building east from Sacramento, California, met the Union Pacific, building west from Omaha, Nebraska. Over 150 years later, these rails are still polished by steel wheels. Moving just east of the signal bridge, we are in time for one final look at the UP 5701 as the train enters the Evanston Subdivision for the final 30 miles to the crew change point at Green River. But that's a story for another time. In the meantime, we hope you've enjoyed this wintertime visit to an often overlooked portion of Union Pacific's Oregon Short Line route through Idaho and Wyoming. As always, until next time, thanks for watching.